So, I mean, imagine for a second that you're just signing a standard form, right? Like to get a library card.
Yeah, just everyday paperwork.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You check a box that asks for your address, you sign your name at the bottom, and you hand it over the counter. And, in your mind, you just agreed to return some books on time.
Right, which seems totally harmless.
But according to the theoretical framework we are diving into today, without even realizing it, you just legally declared yourself a wrecked ship, lost at a dark sea, and completely ripe for the government to board and salvage. So, welcome to the deep dive.
I have to say, it is a phenomenal hook to start with, and honestly, it barely scratches the surface of the landscape we're mapping out today.
Yeah, because today we are looking at a stack of sources. We've got articles, theoretical legal essays, these really dense jurisprudential critiques, and they present a premise so staggering, I literally had to read it 3 times just to make sure I was interpreting it correctly.
It's definitely not light reading, that's for sure.
Not at all. I mean, we are not doing a standard critique of government bureaucracy or like tax policy here. We aren't talking about whether a specific law is constitutional or not. The texts that you, our listener, have shared with us outline a highly specific, incredibly complex framework.
Right.
And it claims that the entire modern legal system is no longer a set of rules for citizens living on solid land.
Yeah, the foundational argument across all these documents is that modern governance operates as an opaque, kind of alchemical operation of maritime law.
Alchemy, like literal magic.
Well, yeah, they use that terminology.
Yeah.
It is a system that the authors claim is explicitly designed to treat human beings not as, sovereign individuals, but as lost corporate cargo drifting in an ocean of global commerce.
Okay, let's unpack this because I have to just marvel at the sheer ambition of the source material here.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just presenting some fringe legal theory. It is framing the evolution of law as literal mechanical alchemy. Like you said, we're talking about transmutations, elemental shifts, magic words. It is just wild.
It really is.
But, our mission today is to impartially decode what these sources are actually claiming. We're going to map out these hidden currents of modern governance and look at the exact mechanisms these authors believe are operating right under our noses.
And to truly grasp what these sources are arguing,
Yeah.
you have to completely discard your conventional everyday understanding of the vocabulary you use.
Like what kind of vocabulary?
Well, you have to forget what you think words like lawful, resident, and even the word person mean.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The authors refer to the modern legal structure as linguistic high priestcraft. And by the end of this deep dive, our goal is to give you the lens required to read a standard tax form or a driver's license application or even a court summons and see the underlying mechanics of what the texts consider a ritualistic transmutation.
A ritualistic transmutation. Man, that phrasing brings us to the very foundation of this entire theory. Or actually, I should say the intentional destruction of that foundation.
Right.
Because the texts describe the evolution of modern governance not as some boring administrative update, right? Not as politicians just passing new bills to keep up with the times, but as a liturgical erasure and an ontological restructuring.
Those are massively heavy terms, so let's break them down a bit, starting with ontology.
Please do.
So, ontological restructuring implies a fundamental change in the very nature of being. Ontology is basically the philosophical study of existence.
Okay.
And the sources are arguing that the legal system didn't just, change the rules of the game. It changed what a human being actually is in the eyes of the law.
Wait, really? Like legally altered what a human is?
Exactly. They argue that historically the law was structured around the reality of a living, breathing human being attached to physical soil. But that reality was, it was inconvenient for the modern state.
Right, because a living human with inherent rights is pretty difficult to manage. So the texts describe an alchemical progression, like a 3-stage process of distillation designed to break down that inherent nature. And stage 1 is vividly described as the grinding of terrestrial dust.
Let's look at the metaphor they use for that, because it's so specific. They conceptualize the ancient terrestrial common law as a massive, immovable mountain.
Okay, I can picture that.
It is fixed, it is clear, it is solid, you can literally walk on it. But the state, driven by the needs of global commerce and administrative control, it can't easily move a mountain.
No, obviously not.
Right. It cannot fluidly direct a mountain to do what it wants. So to gain maneuverability, the state has to grind that solid mountain into dust. The solid state of land-based common law is systematically destroyed. It's not preserved, it's not simply amended, it is pulverized.
Which sets up the physical conditions for stage two, right?
Yeah.
The vaporization of boundaries. Because once you have ground that solid mountainous law into fine dust, it loses all its structural integrity. You can just blow it away.
Exactly. The texts argue that this stage is all about destroying the fixed jurisdictional lines that are tied to physical geography.
And what's really fascinating here is how the authors link this to globalization. Like physical borders, terrestrial property lines, the actual physical limits of a town or a nation. These are friction points.
Yeah, they slow things down.
Exactly. So by vaporizing these boundaries in the legal code, the state prepares the environment for stage three, which they call the management of mercantile currents.
Right. Because once the solid land is gone and the geographical boundaries are vaporized into the wind, authority is reconstituted.
Okay.
But it's not rebuilt as a new building or a new mountain. It is reconstituted into the transactional fluid flow of maritime statutes. The text makes a massive distinction here, arguing that authority moved from being something that is found to something that is managed.
Found versus managed.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this distinction between found and managed authority is basically the crux of the alchemical shift. Found authority implies that your rights exist inherently.
Like they're just part of nature.
Exactly. They are tied to the earth beneath your feet and to your living flesh. They exist prior to, and totally independent of, any bureaucrat writing them down in a ledger. You find them in the natural order of things, kind of like finding a stone in a field.
Right.
Managed authority, on the other hand, is entirely different. It is a reactive, mercurial chemistry.
Because you can't just, find a current of water and expect it to stay still. You have to manage it, you have to dam it, redirect it, channel it. The state wants total maneuverability.
Exactly.
Solid laws are an obstacle to the fast flow of global commerce.
And the authors argue that a system based on inherent, unchangeable rights really limits the expansion of state power. If your rights are a solid wall, the state cannot walk through it.
Sure.
But if the state can redefine the environment itself, like if they can flood the field, that wall is suddenly underwater. It becomes completely meaningless.
Oh, I love this imagery. And it actually makes me think of an analogy. It sounds kind of like taking a solid, heavy gold bar, right? Which, in this theory, represents your inherent, immovable terrestrial rights. And tossing that bar into a crucible to melt it down into a liquid.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because when it's a solid bar, it's undeniably yours, it has a fixed weight, and it's pretty hard for someone to secretly shave a piece off. But once it's melted down into a liquid state, the state can pour it into any shape they need.
Right, they control the mold.
Exactly. They can siphon off a few drops here and there through taxation or some new regulation, and you wouldn't even notice the volume changing because it's just a pool of liquid.
That is a highly illustrative way to look at what the sources called the transition into a volatile state.
Volatile, like the chemical term.
Yes.
Yeah.
In chemistry, a volatile substance is one that changes states easily. It evaporates, it is unstable, it reacts immediately to changes in pressure or temperature.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the text explicitly argues that the state deliberately rendered the law volatile. A volatile law is one that shifts its properties based on the needs of the mercantile market, or just the whim of the executive branch.
So, what does this actually mean for you, the listener, who's just trying to navigate your life? If we extrapolate this out, if authority is a volatile fluid rather than a solid foundation, it means the individual can no longer simply stand on their rights.
No, you really can't.
You can't plant your feet on a liquid. The moment you try to assert a solid right, the legal ground just flows right around you. You have to constantly swim, constantly tread water, or you just drown in the bureaucracy.
And that captures the sheer exhaustion of navigating the modern legal system that the authors are critiquing here. If the law is a solid foundation, you are protected by its permanence.
Right, you can build on it.
Exactly. You can anchor your life, your property, and your family to it. But if the law is a fluid current managed by the state, it is nearly impossible for you to grasp or resist.
Yeah.
The state ensures that you are constantly being manipulated through the fluid dynamics of statutes, which are always changing, always being updated, always being reinterpreted by courts rather than being protected by the static integrity of the soil.
And if we are accepting this analogy that the law has been melted down from a solid mountain to a fluid ocean, the sources do something really fascinating. They don't just use this as a loose metaphor.
No, they are very literal about it.
Yeah, they assign very specific ancient elemental symbols to these two states of law. It's almost like we need to look at the periodic table of this legal alchemy.
That's a good way to frame it.
The texts explicitly frame this entire geopolitical evolution as a battle between two elements, salt versus mercury.
Yes, the elemental jurisdictions. This is where the author's theoretical framework becomes highly structured. They categorize the entire history and application of law into these two competing elemental domains.
Okay.
Salt, representing the earth, is the terrestrial common law. Mercury, representing water and fluidity, is the mercantile maritime statutes.
Let's start with salt then, because this represents the world we kind of think we still live in. The text calls this the sovereignty of salt, and it has three main pillars.
Right.
The first one we already touched on a bit, ontological permanence.
Let's dive a bit deeper into what ontological permanence means in practice, though. In a salt jurisdiction, your rights are inextricably linked to your living flesh and to the physical land itself.
So it's very tangible.
Extremely tangible. They are anchored in a reality that precedes any government charter or bureaucratic grantor. You have rights simply because you exist on the earth.
Okay.
The text suggests that under a salt paradigm, a man's home is quite literally his castle. Not because a zoning board gave him a permit, but because his connection to the physical soil grants him supreme authority over that specific physical space.
Right. And then the second pillar of salt is jurisdictional solidity, because authority is rooted in a fixed physical territory like the actual dirt, the rocks, the rivers.
Yeah.
The law is transparent.
Yes.
It is highly resistant to the erosive forces of linguistic manipulation. You can physically walk the boundaries of your property. If there is a dispute with a neighbor, you go out and look at the fence line or the creek bed.
Jurisdictional solidity means the rules are totally constrained by geography.
Right.
A sheriff from one county cannot simply cross a river and enforce his will in another county because his authority physically stops at the water's edge. The law is localized, visible, and deeply tied to the community living on that specific patch of earth.
And the third pillar of salt is what the texts call ancient sovereignty. This is described as a vestigial power base derived from the biblical covenant of the earth. And it is fundamentally preservative.
Like literal salt.
Exactly. Think of salt as a preservative in the ancient world. It was used to cure meats, to stop decay, to keep things intact over long periods of time.
And similarly, the salt jurisdiction preserves the static integrity of the individual. It prioritizes what the texts call a true master-servant relationship.
Wait, master-servant?
Yeah, but crucially, in this paradigm, you are the master of your estate, and the law, meaning the government, is the servant. The government's only legitimate function is to preserve your inherent rights, much like salt preserves food.
Okay, so that is salt. It's solid, it's clear, it's preservative, and it serves the individual on the land. But, according to the framework, the mountain of salt has been ground to dust, and we have been dragged into the jurisdiction of Mercury.
And Mercury is really the dark mirror to salt. In the elemental table of this theory, Mercury represents the highly fluid, highly reactive power of commerce.
Okay.
The text points out that the choice of Mercury is not an accident at all. It is heavily inspired by the mythological figure of Hermes.
Wait, the Greek god?
Yes, Hermes in the Greek pantheon, who became Mercury in the Roman pantheon. He was the god of commerce, of communication, of travel, and, quite revealingly, the god of thieves and tricksters.
Wow. Okay, that is quite the mascot for the modern legal system, the god of commerce and thieves.
Right. The sources are highly deliberate about this symbolism. Mercurial power operates on a predatory, hyper-efficient logic that the authors break down into three distinct mechanics.
Let's go through those.
The first mechanic is the prioritization of flow. In a mercurial jurisdiction, fixed terrestrial boundaries like the borders of a nation, the property line of a farm, or even the individual rights of a citizen are viewed by the system merely as obstacles.
They're just things in the way.
Exactly. They are friction points that slow down the rapid global movement of capital.
So the system actually despises the solid ground. It doesn't want you to have a localized, protected estate. It wants everything to move fast. Speed is essentially the currency of the state.
Because the state derives its power from taxing, regulating, and managing the movement of things, not the static preservation of things, it favors the speed of trade over the preservation of inherent rights.
Which brings us to the second mechanic of Mercury, transactional deception. Just like the god Mercury, the system is clever, it is non-fixed, and it is inherently deceptive.
Very much so.
The legal definitions change like the shifting sea.
Transactional deception is the idea that the rules are never what they appear to be to the uninitiated. You think you're engaging in a simple transaction, buying a car, opening a bank account, but the system has layered, hidden maritime contracts beneath the surface.
You know, this really makes me think about those 50-page terms of service agreements we all blindly click agree to.
Oh, that's a great example.
Right. Like when we download a new app or buy a piece of software, we always joke that we're signing away our firstborn child because no one actually reads them. And honestly, even if we did, the language is so dense we wouldn't understand it anyway. We just want to use the app.
Exactly.
But these sources are arguing that this exact dynamic, this transactional deception, is how the entire geopolitical legal system works. We are blindly clicking agree on forms that literally sign away our sovereign status.
That is an excellent modern equivalent.
Yeah.
The system relies on the fact that you will prioritize convenience and the flow of your daily life over the tedious, complex defense of your underlying rights.
Yeah, nobody has time for that.
Right. Which leads directly to the third mechanic of Mercury, abyssal opacity.
I love that phrase so much. Abyssal opacity. It sounds like something out of a deep-sea horror movie.
It is entirely meant to evoke that exact feeling. Abyssal opacity means that true authority, the actual rules governing your life, are buried deep in the dark, lightless layers of international code, commercial statutes, and maritime treaty.
Wow.
It is completely inaccessible to the average person. On land, you can see the fence. In the abyssal opacity of the maritime legal ocean, you are completely blind. You need specialized instruments like highly trained lawyers who speak the specific legal lexicon just to navigate the dark, let alone fight back.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though, and this is where I imagine a lot of listeners might be scratching their heads.
Okay, what is it?
If salt is solid and clear, and mercury is fluid and deceptive, how does a government actually mechanically drag you from the solid land into the deep, dark ocean?
That is the big question.
Right. I mean, we are physically standing on dry land. The government doesn't send bureaucrats to your house to physically pick you up, put you in a truck, and throw you into the Atlantic Ocean.
No, they don't.
So how do they assert a maritime, water-based jurisdiction over you when your feet are firmly on the dirt?
This is the core mechanical question of the entire text. And to understand the author's answer, you have to remember that in a mercurial system, physical reality matters much less than documented reality.
Okay, documented reality.
Yeah. On land, physical reality is supreme. But in the legal abyss, the court operates almost like a blind computer algorithm. It doesn't look out the window to see if you are standing on dirt. It only looks at the documents, the filings, the paperwork.
Right, it only knows what it reads.
So to answer your question, the state drags you into the water not with physical force, but through linguistic manipulation.
The sources refer to this as the linguistic high priestcraft.
Yes, they drag you into the sea by changing what things are called and tricking you into adopting those new names.
And this is where the theory shifts from high-level philosophy into direct, practical, almost frightening application. To bridge the gap between the solid shore and the fluid abyss, the system uses what the texts call a liturgy of reclassification. And I really want to pause on that word. Liturgy.
It's a very intentional word choice. A liturgy is a customary public ritual of worship performed by a religious group.
Right.
So by using the word liturgy, the authors are implying a religious rite, a formal, ritualistic casting of a skull.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the sources explicitly frame the law not as a secular administrative function, but as a deeply esoteric religion. The state is the church, the judges are the high priests, and the legal documents are the incantations.
It's a powerful metaphor.
It is. The texts identify specific linguistic pairs that perform a metabolic breakdown of the human being. They claim these specific words literally transmute a living soul into a maritime asset. So let's dissect the three key linguistic shifts from the text, starting with the most common one. Lawful versus legal.
Okay, so in our everyday conversation, we use lawful and legal completely interchangeably, right?
Yeah, pretty much always.
If a police officer pulls you over, you might ask if what you did was illegal or unlawful, and you mean the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But in this alchemical paradigm, they are fundamentally diametrically opposed. Lawful refers to that which is fixed, found, and rooted in the solid traditions of the terrestrial realm. It is the vocabulary of salt.
So like the laws of nature, the ancient common law. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. Fixed moral absolutes.
Precisely, it is the bedrock. But legal. Legal refers to that which is enacted. It is the vocabulary of Mercury.
Okay.
A legal statute is not a fixed moral absolute. It is a mercurial rule where authority is treated as a current. It is a man-made code that can be redirected, expanded, or contracted like the tide to meet the shifting needs of commerce.
That makes sense.
Driving 55 miles an hour is legal today, but illegal tomorrow if the state changes the sign. It has nothing to do with inherent morality.
So, according to the text, when you step into a courtroom and argue that you are doing something lawful, you are invoking the permanent, inherent rights of the land. You are basically trying to stand on the mountain.
Right.
But the moment you hire an attorney to argue that your actions were legal, you have inadvertently stepped off the mountain. You are stepping into the fluid, managed currents of the maritime state. You are consenting to the rhythmic manipulation of the state's rules.
Because by using their vocabulary, you are acknowledging their jurisdiction. You are validating the enacted statutes over your inherent rights.
Wow. Okay, so the second linguistic pair in this liturgy of reclassification is inhabitant versus resident. And this one feels incredibly relevant to daily life.
It is. According to the text, an inhabitant possesses a permanent, sovereign connection to the soil and its ancient protections. The word itself implies dwelling in the habitat.
Inhabitant.
An inhabitant is a master of the estate. The land belongs to them, or they belong to the land, in a deeply symbiotic, permanent way.
But a resident. I mean, everyone is a resident. You have a residential address, you pay resident tuition at a state college, you have a resident visa.
And the authors argue that resident is a maritime-based classification. It's a purely commercial term.
Okay.
When you classify yourself as a resident, you mathematically strip away your sovereign connection to the soil. A resident is essentially a temporary occupant, a tenant, someone who is passing through a commercial zone.
So there's no permanence there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The status of resident is designed to favor the movement of capital. You do not own the estate. You merely reside in a jurisdiction managed by the state.
So when I fill out a census form or a tax return and declare myself a resident of New York, I think I'm just telling them where my house is.
Right.
But the algorithm of the court reads that as, this entity claims no sovereign terrestrial rights and operates as a commercial tenant within our maritime jurisdiction.
That is exactly how the framework argues this system parses your paperwork. The court algorithm scans the document for the keyword resident, and because maritime statutes are designed to govern commercial residents, applying that word to yourself gives the court the jurisdictional key to open your case under maritime rules.
Stripping away your common law protections.
Yes.
Which brings us to the final, and honestly, undoubtedly the most jarring linguistic shift in the text. Man versus person.
In this framework, the man, and they use this term to refer generally to mankind, living flesh of any gender, breathing humans, is a sovereign of the land. A man has a soul, a heartbeat, and inherent rights granted by existence.
Okay.
The state cannot truly govern a man because the state did not create the man.
That is person.
A person is a corporate fiction. The etymology of the word person comes from the Latin persona, meaning an actor's mask.
A mask, wow.
In legal terms, a person is an artificial entity created by the state. It is a vessel navigating international trade. A corporation like Apple or Ford is legally considered a person.
Yeah, corporate personhood.
Exactly. The text argues that the state created a corporate person in your name, usually stylized in all capital letters on your birth certificate or driver's license, and tricked the living man into acting as the surety for that corporate vessel.
Okay, I have to push back here. I have to genuinely challenge the logic of this text for a second because this implies a level of consent that I just don't see in reality.
Fair point. Go on.
The texts are calling this a magical spell, right? A liturgy of consent where I willingly transmute myself into a vessel. But if I don't sign that driver's license form as a resident, I can't legally drive to work.
Sure.
If I don't check the box that says person on my tax forms, the IRS will freeze my bank accounts, and I literally won't be able to feed my family. I might even go to jail.
Right.
So how can the authors claim this is a spell of consent when it is so clearly signed under extreme duress? I mean, it's not magic, it's extortion.
That is the most natural and important objection to raise. And the authors of these texts have a very cold, very mechanical answer to it.
What is it?
If we look strictly at the logic of the source material, the system, the abyssal maritime algorithm, does not possess the capacity to care about your duress.
Because it's an algorithm.
Precisely. A computer program doesn't know if you are crying when you hit the enter key. It only knows that the enter key was pressed.
That is so bleak.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that the maritime jurisdiction is utterly devoid of empathy. It operates on strict liability and contractual mechanics. The state has monopolized the avenues of survival, driving, banking, housing, and placed the toll booths, in the maritime jurisdiction.
Right.
They aren't asking for your enthusiastic philosophical consent. They only require your mechanical compliance to trigger the contract. The duress you feel is a human emotion. The court only sees the ink on the paper.
So the system's cold logic is basically, you didn't have to sign it. You could have chosen to walk into the woods and live off the grid as a terrestrial man. The fact that doing so means you starve is completely irrelevant to the maritime court. You sign the contract to get the privilege of driving, therefore, you are a person.
That is the brutal reality of the framework. You are actively participating in the metabolic breakdown of your own sovereignty, even if you are doing it just to survive in the modern world.
Wow.
The texts argue that this terminology completely strips away your status as the master of the estate. It turns you into a commodity for a global market. The terminology is so deeply normalized, so baked into the infrastructure of daily life, that you eagerly reclassify yourself on every piece of paperwork you encounter, just to keep the gears of your life turning.
Okay, so through this inescapable word magic, you've been turned into a person. You have been legally reclassified from a living, breathing human on the solid land into a corporate fiction, a maritime vessel floating in the abyssal sea of commerce.
Correct.
But that brings us to a really, really grim realization. What happens to a vessel that is just aimlessly drifting in the ocean without a recognized master? That brings us to what the texts describe as the absolute most harrowing part of this entire framework: the brutal logic of corporate salvage.
This is where the alchemical process reaches its ultimate intended conclusion. Stage 1 was grinding the dust. Stage 2 was vaporizing the boundaries. Stage 3 was managing the currents. Now we see the purpose of the currents.
Which is?
In the maritime jurisdiction, living flesh simply does not exist. It is not recognized. If you try to assert that you are a living soul in an abyssal maritime court, it is like speaking a dead language to a machine.
It just doesn't compute.
Right. Instead, because you have been severed from the land, you are redefined as corporate salvage.
Salvage, like a shipwreck.
Yes.
Because you have been disconnected from the common law of the land through this linguistic high priestcraft, because you signed the forms declaring yourself a resident and a person, the system looks at you and says, this is not a sovereign man on his land. This is an abandoned vessel drifting at sea.
Yes. The text walks us through 3 devastating implications of this wrecked status. The first is the invocation of the law of abandonment itself.
Okay, how does that work?
In ancient and modern maritime law, if a vessel is found drifting at sea, wrecked or abandoned, meaning it lacks a recognized, capable master from the land, to claim it, someone has to step in to prevent it from becoming a hazard to navigation.
Finders keepers. The law of the sea.
In legal terms, a salver must step in. The state, or the court, looks at the corporate fiction created in your name, the all-TKPS name on your birth certificate, and determines that the living flesh has abandoned its post.
So the state steps in.
Yes, the state benevolently steps in as the salver to rescue the abandoned vessel.
Benevolently.
Right.
Which leads to the second implication, and this is where the trap snaps completely shut: the loss of self-ownership.
Because the state stepped in as the salver, expending energy and resources to rescue and administer your abandoned vessel, maritime law dictates that they automatically claim a superior maritime lien over the wreck.
Let's break down what a lien actually is for the listener real quick.
Good idea.
A lien is a legal right or interest that a creditor has in another's property. Like when you buy a car with a loan, the bank holds a lien on the title until you pay it off. You get to drive the car, but you don't truly own it. If you miss payments, the bank repossesses it because their lien is superior to your possession.
That is the perfect analogy. Under this framework, the dynamic of your entire existence shifts permanently. You are no longer in a master-servant relationship with the government where the law serves to protect your property.
Right.
You are now in a rigid debtor-creditor relationship. The state is the creditor. They hold the superior maritime lien on your legal person and, by extension, your labor, your property, and your children.
Oh, wow.
You are no longer the captain of your ship. You are the cargo. You are an asset backing the debts of the state.
It's essentially state-sponsored pirate law, or like treasure hunting. It's like finding a massive commercial ghost ship drifting in the Atlantic. Maritime law says the salver gets the lien. The state looks at the population, sees millions of residents completely disconnected from the solid land of common law, declares them all wrecked ships, and legally boards them to salvage their assets.
And the texts are incredibly clear on the state's motivation here. They don't do this to protect you. They don't step in as salver out of a moral obligation to the living flesh.
Of course not.
The state intervenes strictly for what the authors call the liquidity of the mercantile market. Your value to the state is strictly your salvage value as a corporate asset. Your labor can be taxed, your property can be regulated, and your future earnings can be monetized on the global market.
Which brings us to the final, really crushing implication of this section, liturgical subordination.
Liturgical subordination is the ultimate result of the alchemy. Because you are a salvaged cargo with a superior lien placed against you, your inherent terrestrial rights are entirely extinguished.
Entirely extinguished.
Yes. A piece of cargo in the hold of a ship does not have constitutional rights. It does not have freedom of speech or the right to bear arms. In their place, you are handed mere privileges.
And what's the fundamental difference between a right and a privilege in this specific context?
Well, a right is inherent. It cannot be revoked without due process of the common law. A privilege is a temporary license granted by the salver, the state, and it is based purely on the shifting fluid conditions of the mercantile contract.
So they can just change their mind.
Exactly. Driving is a privilege, operating a business is a privilege, even traveling can be treated as a privilege, and what the state gives as a privilege, the state can easily and unilaterally take away because it's just a condition applied to a piece of salvage.
So what does this all mean? If we take a breath and just, accept the premise of these deeply complex sources, if we accept that the terrestrial shore has been permanently submerged, that the solid mountain of law has been ground to dust, and that we are all legally floating as wrecked cargo in an abyssal ocean of commerce,
Right.
how does the learner, the person listening to this right now, actually survive this landscape? Because we promised a way to navigate this.
You did. And the sources do provide a synthesis. They don't just leave you to drown. But their solution is not to try and magically rebuild the mountain.
The mountain is gone.
The mountain is gone. To survive, the texts argue you must accept three inescapable realities of the modern era. First, you must accept the volatility of authority. You have to understand that the law is now a fluid motion.
It is mercury, not salt.
Yes. You are operating in an environment of constant rhythmic motion where definitions are never static and statutes will always change to favor the state.
As we said earlier, you can't plant your feet on a wave. If you go into court pounding your fists on the table, demanding your common law rights, you are fighting the ocean.
You'll lose.
Yeah, you will be held in contempt and sink.
Precisely. You have to learn to swim, which leads to the second reality, the supremacy of symbolism. To survive, you must become a student of the linguistic high priestcraft. You must decode the maritime metaphors in real time.
What does that look like practically for the listener? Let's ground this. Next time they open their mail and get a jury summons or a tax notice, what should they actually do?
Well, the authors would advise you to stop reading the document in English and start reading it in legalese. Look at how your name is spelled. Is it in all capital letters?
Oh, right, the corporate fiction.
Exactly. That is the corporate fiction. Look at the terms they use. Are they asking if you are a resident? Are they asking for your signature as a person? Recognizing the high priestcraft when you see it on a document is the first step to understanding how your status is being transmutated.
Because you can't defend yourself against a spell if you don't know the words being chanted.
Perfectly said.
And the third reality for survival.
The salvage of the subject. You must shed the illusion that the state is your servant. You must recognize with clear eyes that the state views you as a corporate asset with a superior maritime lien placed upon it.
The text's ultimate warning is profound and, honestly, a bit chilling. Authority is no longer a mountain to be climbed. It is a tide to be charted.
That is the essence of it.
And I think that's the absolute key takeaway for our listeners today. Recognizing the state's salvage claim isn't about surrendering to it. It's not about throwing your hands up in defeat and just drowning in the abyss. It's about mastering the chemistry of the currents so you can actually navigate your way through the claim.
Right.
If you know you are in the ocean, you can stop trying to walk and learn how to sail. You can learn how to manage the corporate vessel they created for you rather than letting it drift as an abandoned wreck.
That is the exact empowerment the authors intend. And, if we build strictly on the logic of these elemental transmutations from the sources, it raises an incredibly provocative question for the future.
Oh.
A question the texts hint at, but that our modern reality is rapidly accelerating.
Oh, I like where this is going. Lay it on us.
The entire premise of these texts is that geopolitical power underwent a massive alchemical shift from the solid earth, the salt, to the fluid oceans of commerce and mercury. Earth to water.
Right.
But look at the modern world today, right now. Capital, commerce, and identity are increasingly turning into completely invisible, borderless digital data. We have cryptocurrencies bypassing central banks. We have algorithmic high-frequency trading. We have cloud-based digital IDs and biometric passports.
Wow, so the ocean of commerce isn't even wet anymore. It's completely vaporized.
Exactly. So what is the next alchemical transmutation? If human governance shifted from earth to water to facilitate the industrial age of global shipping, are we about to be vaporized into air for the digital age?
That's wow.
If the state managed to use linguistic magic to turn living flesh into a maritime vessel floating in the sea, what element will our legal identities be transmuted into next when the oceans themselves evaporate into the cloud? Will we become mere packets of data?
Yeah.
Algorithms of compliance.
That is a staggering thought to leave on. From dust to water to vapor, from sovereign man to wrecked corporate vessel to literally a ghost in the machine. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the hidden tides of power. It has been a wild journey through some highly complex source material, but we hope it gives you a new lens to view the bureaucracy around you. We encourage you to keep questioning the words you read, the forms you sign, and the waters you swim in.
Navigate carefully.